I walked up to Jor-El at Clark Kent's wedding and I shook Jor-El's hand and I said I knew your father and your great-grandfather, they were good people and they were actually trying to save the Kryptonians and their home, so you have my respect. And then Jor-El said, Lord Rao the First have so many that I want to ask you, so please when you have the time could you and I have a conversation? And I said yes, when I am not too busy with other things. And then Jor-El said, yes, it seems you have chosen a new vessel for your powers after all these years, and I must say you have chosen wisely and born of Earth. And I said, well, it wasn't really my choice where I was born and how the rebirth of the phoenix is complicated. Upon my death I returned to ashes only to be reborn again later somewhere else, but it seems I am reborn with my people again this time and I was able to my powers again and I am reborn stronger than ever. And then Zod said, well, regardless, I am glad you have returned and you saved our people once again even after they tried to start a war with your home. And Zod glared angrily at Zod and Zod looked down in regret and Harley was talking happily with the other women and I said Zod should get married on Earth if he wishes to. And then Zod said, I don't think I'm welcome here. And I said, you're not, but maybe there's a way to deal with that. And then me and Zod went and talked to Amanda Waller and she said, absolutely not, why would you even help this man? Haven't you done enough for his people? He's a war criminal that killed some innocent people, he slaughtered hundreds of innocent human beings. And then Waller said, why would I ever help him? And then I said, because he will become a member of your Suicide Squad. And then she said, oh okay, I can manage that. And I said, yes ma'am, I suppose you will. And Amanda Waller asked, so what does he want? And I said he wants to get married to his pregnant human girlfriend, she's from Earth but he's not, they want a legal marriage on Earth. Can you make that happen and see that he gets amnesty for his past crimes? And then Waller said, I will do it under one condition, he does a public apology and I want to be able to get his help whenever I need it. And I said done. And Zod looked at me with fear but relief and Zod said, I will do it. And she said, good, because you're going to do a public apology now. And then Zod was now standing on a public podium with reporters staring at him and he apologized to everyone for what him and his people did to Earth, and no one in Metropolis liked him and there was even a lot of random people saying insulting things in the crowd. I heard people saying douchebag, I even heard a woman say jerk, and of course Zod frowned after being insulted by a crowd of unsavory people. And then he went to Waller and he said, I agree to everything now, please let me marry my wife. And then Waller started to give all the necessary legal documents, even his new driver's license, to Zod. And then for a second she pulled it back and she said, what do we say? And he looked angry and he said, we say thank you ma'am. And then the blonde Jennifer Lawrence look-alike Chloe Sullivan smiled big and she said thank you to Waller. And Waller said, make sure he activates his new smartphone so I can call him anytime. And Chloe said, I will. And Waller said, good, see that you do. And then when they left, Waller said, I need to go on a vacation and maybe retire soon, I'm too old for this shit, maybe my daughter could take my place soon. And then I heard that Chris Smith got married without me, he ended up marrying Amelia Harcourt, and apparently there's still monsters attacking cities, but now Keith and Chris Smith are fully prepared for them using key energy, and they can even power up their key to fly to the sun really fast and then throw them in it. In fact, Chris actually had to do that to save the Earth from these monsters more than once, and that's when he actually asked Amelia Harcourt to marry him because he's actually scared he will die soon. And then I went to visit Chris Smith and his family, and then Chris Smith and his brother were talking about something and I flew down on the roof and I listened for a little while and they were talking about a few things that happened recently with Rick Flag Sr. and Rick Flag Jr. Apparently Rick Flag got into some trouble with his wife because she found out about his little brief affair with Amelia Harcourt, and she even showed up at his workplace and started beating the crap out of him, and Keith and Chris were laughing their asses off about it, and Rick Flag's father had to transfer him to another Argus precinct for his indiscretions. He also had to see a marriage counselor with his wife, and I giggled silently and I was snickering and I heard Keith and Chris talking again, and Chris asked, when are you going to move out of Dad's house? And Keith said, man, I just got back not too long ago and I honestly just started being a grown man. Dude, I haven't around as long as you were, Chris, and I know Dad is lonely.